parada, of se você vai wak, acorda. Keep in mind, para estar safe, usa suficiente sunscreen, maneira que não se acabe escucha. É two-finger rule. Vamos usar dois dedos para cada parte do corpo que você esmera sunscreen. Também me quer corboso. Se você vai wak parada, ou se você tem gym, make sure que você pets está safe na casa também. Donanang enough food and treats, of course. Maneira você para escucha. Friskies tem nice campaign, so make sure que você check bo Friskies food and treats. Anto assim você participar para ganhar fun prizes. Alright. Me quero bisa para mim que turcos, que a pessoa de awe também está na inglês, para assim nós para acomodar nos guests, não? Também está tópico interessante, me tá sempre leuk ora que me tem estudante na Universidade de Aruba que tá assim diferente research interessante e assim está trabalhando projeto não por ajuda eigenlijk nossa comunidade, dus assim nós vai ter awe e para motivo e também está na inglês. Me quero agora turhine também, se você não tá a chance para escutar o episode via rádio, que você pode aqui live, riba Facebook, YouTube, pero também você pode escutar depois riba Spotify e Apple Podcast. Thus, there's no reason not to listen to the whole thing. Alright, so without further ado, me quero bisa dankie na Cool FM e of course dankie na Friskies e Neutrogena for making Sincerely Carolina possible. E me também laga nos guests introducir ang miss. Bom dia, good morning. Oh wait. Okay.
Good morning.
Bom dia, good morning. All right. So we have Keanu and Millie here, and I'm just gonna let you introduce yourselves and feel free to share whatever you want to share, and then we'll get into the conversation.
So starts.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Keanu. Keanu Maduro. I am a senior year student at the University of Aruba and the Faculty of Arts and Science within the program of Social Work and Development.
For me, it's the same. My name is Milou or Millie, and I'm also in my 4th year of the Social Work and Development program.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. And indeed, but besides that, I just want to tell y'all that Millie has been a listener of Sincerely Carolina for a while,
Yes.
and she also shares a lot of information. I love interaction with listeners. She makes suggestions sometimes about topics. We discuss it, and then it comes back on the episode. So obviously, it's nice to have you here as well, and just to keep those conversations going. So if you're listening and you think that there are topics that are interesting, by all means, feel free to reach out. I enjoy having those conversations and finding ways of bringing important topics forward. So thank you, Millie, and thank you for accepting the invitation as well. All right, so you had an assignment for a course, and I was invited to give a guest lecture as part of this, right? And there were many different topics in your classroom, which I think was really interesting to see the diversity in the topics as well. But what I noticed is that more and more the topics about social issues are not just what we used to call like the standard topics, right? So we used to see a lot on poverty and a lot on, for example, like child abuse. Those are topics that used to be very popular, and by all means popular in the sense of doing research and popular in the sense of presenting and informing about. And these topics remain important, obviously, at all times. So yes, they are important. But I noticed that we are starting to dig a little bit deeper as to why these things happen and what contribute, or what are effects of these issues. So I love seeing that. And one of those things has been, on the topic of abuse in general. You have seen like domestic abuse, you have seen child abuse, and then also the other like little aspects, and also the backlash that good things have gotten because of that. And one of those things is the word masculinity, right? I feel like it's almost like a bad word, or it has become like a bad word, just like feminism has become like a bad word, right? It's very charged with nuances, with bias, and masculinity as well. We have sort of created a space where it's no longer safe to use that word in a positive way. So there's a stigma around that. And it doesn't have to be, of course, because the word in itself doesn't have a negative connotation, but it's the behaviors that exist around certain cultures and certain people that kind of create that. So I think it's important that we address that we by all means are not going to say that being masculine or masculinity is a bad thing. That is not what we're trying to say at all. And we genuinely want to start conversations in making that a positive word, and what behaviors and attributes make it positive, right?
Yeah.
So without further ado, I just wanted to give that little disclaimer before I get eaten up.
Obviously.
But yes, so I don't know if Millie or Keanu, maybe Keanu, you want to start off by explaining a little bit about your project, what was the goal, and then yes, we'll go from there.
Okay, so for this project, it was actually a combined project between 4 different courses, where we would generally have one specific topic. In this case, it was the stigma behind masculinity and how it impacts adolescents. That was the original idea that we had. So after, I guess, after we started researching more about it, trying to get more information about it, especially here on the islands, of course, one thing we figured out was we're lacking information. We don't really openly get sources or reliable sources of information on this topic here on the islands. So, sorry.
Just
That-
to add, it's not just this topic. Just I can hear other students and researchers going like, no information on.
Anything.
Yes. So thank you, students, for collecting information.
Yes, we appreciate you. No, so yeah, because we couldn't find anything, online or in archives, so to say, we were like, okay, let's start approaching professionals. Let's start approaching professionals on the field, especially within the social field. So that's where I was able to talk to 3 or 4 professionals from different agencies to get their opinion on the topic of masculinity and how they view it and how it is seen as a problem on the island, let's say. And what we found out actually was it does reflect what we could find elsewhere. So outside of Aruba, in the States or in Netherlands or just worldwide. Like this is just a, let's say, problem that exists, that there is people are not aware of what it actually means to be masculine. And what they do think it means is actually toxic masculinity. So with this information, we try to just compile everything together, bring this forward, and start small little campaigns where we can start bringing this awareness to just everyone out there, especially on a topic where there is a misconception of what it actually is. So for the most part, that's what our goal was and has been, to just bring awareness, bring light to what it actually means to be masculine versus what it means to be a toxic masculine practitioner, let's say.
Yes, and I think that's very important how you word it. Obviously, you both know that these are topics that I find very interesting. I do research on them as passion projects, but also workshops and courses and all that stuff. And one of the things that I have learned, especially in the past, I want to say maybe like 6 months. So I had like the scores that I followed by UN on changing mentalities, actually, and the nuances of words and word choices. And I find myself also doing some of the things that were counteractive to what you're trying to do. So one of the things that you mentioned is that we have focused a lot on negative words, right? Like saying stuff like toxic masculinity. And it is a term that exists because there are behaviors attached to it. But masculinity in itself, like some people were saying, oh, positive masculinity, and I was doing that too. But then you're almost, saying that masculinity in itself wasn't positive already.
Yeah.
And then I was like, so I found myself doing that as well. And then I was like, no, there are, 2 words, and it's masculinity as it is intended to be. And then you have the negative aspect, which is the toxic masculinity part. So I do think it's very important to work on that stigma, right? On breaking that stigma, and that we are not creating other issues while we are trying to shed lights on important issues. And of course, it creates backlash, right? If you are somebody who is doing something and you generally believe you're doing something right and you're behaving well, and then all of a sudden what you identify with is considered bad, then there is backlash to it. So it is important to figure out our words. So starting today, I myself, no, I'm just kidding. I have been trying to work on this for a little bit now, but I do encourage everybody who's listening that if you have an issue with these words, just try to consider that, being masculine or masculinity is an identity, and that in itself is not bad. Of course, by all means, call out people on their bad behaviors, but identifying as a masculine person and being masculine is not a bad thing. Once you behave toxically and in a bad way, abusively, etc., then it's bad, right? And then you're not being masculine, then you're being a toxic masculine. So I just want to encourage you all to celebrate those positive people in your life, those people who are embodying what masculinity ought to be, right? In a good sense. Then again, there are no boxes, so be whatever you want to be, but but if that identity helps you, then celebrate that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yes, Melly, so tell us a little bit about that. I love how you talk to people in the social field, right?
Yeah.
Because eventually, hopefully, you will go into that field as well, so it's good that you are
Exactly.
in touch.
Also networking.
Yes, also.
Very important.
Yes, but tell us about what you found, and then how it kind of shaped your project and your image, maybe as a woman as well.
Yeah. So we also did a few analysis on policies that exist in Aruba and also just globally about gender equality or gender inequality, also the SDGs as well. And we found that most of them are only focused on the protection of women and girls, which is obviously also very important. But I think that most people oversee the importance of masculine people in the protection of women and girls, because it has so many layers, but eventually the source of abuse is with the toxic masculinity, like men that they cannot express themselves in the right way, or they are taught that they have to, in order to be masculine, they have to be abusive and not emotional. And so we realized that in the creation of gender policies, that there are no men included in the making of it, but also there is barely any mention of them in the policy, which for us was interesting, but also concerning, of course. And I also want to say that the role of women in masculinity, you can think like, oh, why are women talking about this topic? But it's also the role of us as mothers, sisters, other family members and friends, that we take ourselves accountable for not stigmatizing men for sharing their emotions. I think that's also really important in the upbringing of a child as a mother. Yeah, that's basically the
Yes, and I love
the
how you
core.
said that, right?
Mhm.
So it's of course not only when we talk about gender equality and when we talk about creating safe spaces for gender equality. It is amazing how we somehow forgot to include men in
Yeah.
that conversation, and I understand why, and I understand also why
Of
men would
course.
not want to be included or would not even want to be in that space, because I genuinely think that in that process we have become so defensive on the side of women, right, that we have ignored, like you said, the impact of not having the right guidance and the right programs and the right spaces for boys especially. And then of course adolescents, adolescent boys and men, and then young men. So, and like you said, people might wonder why are women having this conversation, but I'm also wondering why are not more men having the conversation on on these topics as well. And that is the
Yep.
thing. It is that women have been researching these issues for a longer time. They have been invested, and I think it's a very strong suit that they have also identified that, oh, we kind of missed a mark, and we kind of left a huge chunk of our population behind in trying to create a safer space. And I also learned that it is important to hold yourself accountable and making sure that we are not being hyper vigilant almost with behaviors where we decide that regular behaviors that are indeed masculine but not necessarily in any way negative, but we have been so hyper vigilant that women in general have almost like disregarded those as well, or created a negative impact around that. So and it is difficult because it's relearning, unlearning stigmas, right? But then also being honest with yourself and saying, do I truly want a space that is equal and fair for everyone, but also safe and enjoyable for everyone? Because maybe it is to some extent fair and safe, but not necessarily enjoyable to a group. And then it's like, okay, to what extent I don't think that the goal should be to exclude and to create other issues. So I love how indeed you presented that back in your project, how you really showcase that effect, and know that it's a movement. And I applaud and encourage all people to reconsider themselves for a little bit, right? Check in with yourself, make sure that you, in that process of trying to create a better world, are not stigmatizing and hurting others as well. But Keanu, as a young man, what stood out to you in this process? What do you think, when you looked at gender policy? Even you're at a stage in your life, I mean, you're finishing your education. I would say you are doing pretty well, right? In the standards of what we have considered life path and what is the norm,
Yep.
right? So you go to school as a child, and then you finish, and then you go on to higher education. So you're walking that path, and you are in a field that is predominated by women, right? It is a field that needs more men. That is something that has been identified long time ago, but it's hard. It's hard to encourage men to go into this field because of the stigma that women are more emotional and more caring, and men that go into the field of like psychology or social work, it's like, why are you so soft, right? So how did you find yourself in that research and thinking, these are things that maybe I wish we were more aware of when I was younger? Or what is something that you saw that you think we really need to get on that if we don't want more issues?
Maybe to mirror a little bit about what Millie mentioned, that especially when it comes to the policies, the lack of involvement of the male figure. Now, of course, we cannot involve just anyone, because not everyone is aware enough or educated enough to help make those important decisions for the rest of us. But the fact that it's missing is something that it's concerning. And also, like you mentioned, the whole aspect of the social work field and maybe it's the psychological field. So it's a female-dominated profession still, and you said it well. Like, it's the part of the reason is because of the stigma behind it, and we're being too soft, so that means you're not masculine enough, which already is just giving into that stigmatization of what it means to be masculine. So for me, it was a interesting choice, because I brought this forward because I thought it was something interesting that we could perhaps do our project about, not thinking how much I would actually learn from it. Of course, I've been on this journey of self-discovery, educating myself, becoming aware of things that are around me. But I would imagine that the general public or the normal pedestrian or civilian would not know certain things that everyone should know or should be aware of. Even the aspect of rights. Many people don't know that they have their human rights. So
Or
this
they
is
know that human rights exist, but not necessarily what that means, right?
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's why I thought it was important to bring forward, and I'm happy that the team also, you know, backed this up and wanted to also focus on this aspect because again, we are lacking that information, we are lacking that substance of like, hey, this is what it truly means to be either a male or female or whatever you identify as. The lack of information is it's concerning. So that's why I wanted to at least bring focus to this topic specifically. And just like Millie mentioned, when talking to professionals, we tend to forget the importance of the role of the mother, of the sister, of the partners within masculinity,
Yeah.
because they have so much power that they don't even know about. And that's something that stuck with me when I was talking to multiple professionals on the field, that sometimes it even starts with the mothers. Of course, the fathers need to be accountable for the way they're acting, the way they're talking, and everything. But the mothers also have a bigger, I wouldn't say responsibility, because I don't want to put it on any one person, but they don't know how much power they do have especially within the upbringing of their sons, where they are able to teach them, whereas perhaps the father was not capable. The mothers can teach them about their emotions, their feelings, how to express themselves. And that is one thing that stuck with me, because I never thought about it that way. I always thought, like, yeah, it's a man's problem, because we're the perpetrators to this problem right here, which is not false.
But it's also not fully true, right?
Yeah.
So, like you said, we don't have a lot of data for our regions, and there has been a lot of research going on the islands, in the Caribbean region, and the Latin American region. It was really nice to see that back in the course that I followed by the UN, and it was also by the University of Trinidad and Tobago, and they have a whole program on gender and diversity. So that was really nice, because you would think that these are not popular or sexy, for the Caribbean. But in that research, indeed, you see that what differs us or makes our situation particularly different from maybe, let's say, Europe, is the huge role that women also play in creating unsafe environments, in creating environments where certain behaviors by either, women or men, just people in general, are celebrated or punished. And sadly enough, we have been, as a culture, enabling behaviors that are not, good, that haven't been good to our psyche, that haven't been good for our economy, that haven't been good for our progress, as a region. And in that sense, I always, when I have these conversations with people, it's like, okay, but I feel like we have a very gender equal household, or we do our best, and I'm not interested in this topic because we don't have an issue at home about it. And I don't think people really understand how much it impacts. And it's not just your household, it's not just your family, and it's not just between relationships, between the interactions between men and women, but it is our economy, it is our progress. If we do not have enough people involved, and if that involvement is not diverse enough, then it's not gonna work, right? So, like Millie said, going back to what you said, when you go back and look at things like policies and programs that are supposed to be directed at everyone, and you only have a group of people in charge of that, be it because they were the only ones that were qualified, then the question is, why aren't other people qualified to do this, right? What are we not doing to qualify those people? If if it's only a group, then how is the rest going to feel identified and accountable for something that they had no part in, that they cannot see themselves in, and have no interest? So this has impact on everything else. And if we want to progress as a country, if we want to move forward, if we want to generally create spaces where men feel more comfortable going into higher education, we see that. We have mandatory education here for young kids, and it's very equal. It's very nice to see everybody goes to school. But as soon as we get to like a higher age group, then it skews, and not in favor of men, what maybe a lot of people would think, but in favor of women, because women have been obviously pushed the last couple of years to make sure that they use their rights, make sure that they pursue things that is now available to them. But in the meantime, we kind of forgot that you still need to motivate this other group, you still need to encourage them, because sadly, not everybody has that intrinsic motivation to do these things, or maybe they don't even understand the added value of these things. And again, we can't just include everyone in these decision-making processes of how these programs are. But what are we doing that is not ensuring that we have a more diverse group working on these things?
Yep.
And yeah, we should all stand in front of the mirror, but women as well. What are we doing that is maybe adding to these issues? So I love when we have these conversations, but also these truths thrown at us, because it is a moment where you can either choose to look away and not do anything about it, or generally say, we have been part of the problem as well. What are we going to do with that? So one of the things that, and I'm curious, one of the things that I came across in my course was that there are a bunch of roles that are either have been created culturally, upon women and men, for example, in families, in the social sphere. But then there's this list that was gathered by a research, and of what Caribbean men consider themselves to be, like, what are those important roles. And I'm just gonna say them, and I encourage everybody who's listening, and you too as well, to genuinely think about what is the first thing that you think about when you hear these words. So one of them is the role of the provider. The other one is the role of the protector. And the third role that I want to mention is the role of being the head of the family. So I'm looking at both of you, and anyone who's listening, I'm just wondering, how many of you thought about negative things when I said these words? No? Good.
Not really, no.
Okay. Awesome. So what happens is, because we have done the work, right? And there's lots of work to do. We are able to genuinely stand back and say, like, hold on, these words in themselves are not bad things. But a lot of people, when they hear these words, they think, why? Why do they have to be protectors? Can't women be protectors? And physiologically, there is an advantage to, a build of a man's body. And, just to make sure that when we talk about equality, we by all means do not mean that we acknowledge that there are physiological differences to our bodies. We look differently, we are built differently. So these are traits that are natural for somebody to have and do not necessarily have to have a negative connotation to them. Being a protector, if you are in a situation where you have a person there who is bigger, who is stronger, the logical thing is that that person is either going to assume that role or feel confident in that role, or that others are going to expect that. It does not take away from the other person. It's just a reality, right? And how can we find ways of encouraging that identity without it having to, turn into something negative, like being abusive, right? Because if you're a protector, then you can't be an abuser. And that's the thing, right? These things do not go well together. But also a provider, when we think about provider, sadly, a lot of people think about money, but being a provider is not only about money. Being a provider means that you contribute, that you provide to a situation. And that can be in like, sometimes in financial ways, but it can also be in like, emotional ways. Yes, I was going to say that. Yes. Emotional ways. Safety. Yes. Time. Resources that are, not necessarily financial. So how can we use these identifications and ensure that we continue to build on them in a good way and not destroy that? So when a little boy says that, I want to be like a superhero protector or something, that you don't immediately shut that down and be like, no, because you don't want to, let them build on it, but then make sure that you provide them the tools that, builds on something good and something that, is going to also let them feel good about who they are and who they are in their community. So yes, so I'm genuinely curious about whomever is listening. By the way, we have a WhatsApp number, and I haven't checked it today. Oops. But it's for everybody in Aruba. We have a WhatsApp number. That's Cool FM's number, and that's 594-6757. You can send us a message if you have any questions. And if you're listening and you thought about these words in either a positive or a negative way, I don't want you to feel bad about that, because it is a stigma that has been created around men. And if we're going to talk about gender equality, and if we're going to talk about making a place safer, we need to talk about that as well. So yes, Keanu, you mentioned like a very interesting thing, which was emotional, right? What did you see, maybe even during like your research, that you thought stood out in that sense? As I meant, also with the eyes that you have as somebody who has decided, right, because it's a decision, to genuinely look at yourself and the community you're in and how that impacts.
I think it goes, like, I would say in two different ways. How I've critically and objectively viewed situations and circumstances that we're living in currently. So, of course, looking at the other, looking at what they're doing, what are they enforcing within this stigma still. But it also gave me a chance to actually look inwards, like really think about how I grew up, how I experienced these types of roles when I was younger, or at school, at home, in my community. And it really makes you realize that, wow, thankfully, thanks to the trajectory I went in, I was able to identify these and make changes to it. Show vulnerability, talk about emotions, talk about the feelings. Even being in the program itself now, trying to make that change happen, advocating for it, like, looking inwards, it really made me realize, damn, that was a big change from who I used to be and how I used to think, being in that role of, oh, if I don't do this, they won't think I'm man enough. So it's a little confronting at times, especially when you start realizing things that maybe you still need to work on. But I find once you're aware of what is going wrong is when you can actually start making things right. So being aware of that, lacking aspect has enabled me to become even better.
Acceptance is number one, right?
Definitely.
Acceptance that we all play a role. And like you said, it's also going back. And that can be hard sometimes for some people, but it's important to look back at where we came from. Like you said, maybe not even our household, because even if things at our household felt very safe, and even if they felt, very balanced or whatever, then we also have all these other spaces where we spend so much time, which are schools, right? How that schools, we know that the time spent in schools contributes so much to somebody's development, in some cases even more than, the household, because some children spend more time within the educational setting than they even spend at home. It's not the same for everybody, but we have to understand that and acknowledge that and be aware that it is also important to ensure that those spaces are safe. And like you said, and just being vulnerable with that, also understanding that you can grow, you can change your mind, change your opinion. I know that we are in the era of canceling people. And we are in the time where, we do not let people make mistakes, because if they do, then they're doomed forever. I do not encourage that. And, I also have to acknowledge that I find myself often talking to myself, making sure that I'm not canceling people or dooming people for doing something. Because if we take that standpoint, then any of the work being done doesn't matter, right? Because if we're not gonna let people grow into, better people, then we might as well stop and just whatever. So by all means, if you have conversations with people and you see them struggling with different opinions, with confronting opinions, struggling with their past actions, even take some time and consider, what do they still need? Can I maybe help during this process? Can I redirect them to a place that can help them during this process? Do they just want a listening ear? Maybe right now they're not at a place where they need solutions yet, but of course, making sure that it's safe to you and that you are mentally capable of doing this. But we really need to start finding ways on bridging those gaps, right? And allowing more people the space, like you, to just self-reflect. And I say to you, but just like to me as well, I find myself, I'm not good at like coming back and being like, oh, this thing I said, I'm so sorry, actually. I thought about it. I'm not good at that. And I'm very aware of that. I'm pretty sure my husband's listening. But, but it is important that you do allow people that space and figuring that like, okay, the thing that I was so like, against or turns out that I just didn't understand it well enough. Now I do, and it's okay to say that, and it's okay to, shift course. And if you don't want to explain it, it's also fine. But some people might require some explanation.
I mean, and maybe one of the simplest things that can help is just let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Let's just have open and honest conversation. Create that safe space that people can express themselves without having to feel judged, without having to feel like if they say one thing, like you mentioned, they'll get canceled. Or they'll have a target on their back or anything like that. No, we should be able to talk about these difficult subjects. We should be able to talk about if, you grew up in a very toxic masculine home or vice versa, whichever mindset you have, it should be able to be freely open to discuss these things with each other so we can then learn from one another and then start realizing much quicker like, hey, you know what, maybe I won't agree with this person immediately, but it will start the gears grinding,
Look at that.
Oh, wow.
We have fans outside. Oh my gosh, I just want to take a picture of this. Can I just wait, yes. So that is so nice. So there is somebody outside. Who is it?
My cousin.
Your cousin?
Our classmate also.
Yes? Oh my god. And she's so proud of Millie and Keanu. So she just came by and she stood with a little sign. And I'm going to share it because
adorable.
That was so cute.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, yes, agree to disagree. That is okay, right? Just finding the space to not necessarily being on the same page. Discussion is normal. Disagreements are normal, even within like friendships and stuff. Of course, there are things that are related to our core values, and that's where you should know where you draw that line. But allowing that space and being okay with that, right? That was so cute. I mean, now I'm gonna think about it. I'm gonna start asking my guests, like, do you have fans?
Yeah.
Like,
Let them pass by.
like, yeah. I mean, if you don't have fans, then I don't want it.
No.
Yeah.
But awesome. Thank you for that, Keanu. So Millie, what was
Yes.
that, in the same tune? And I know that, and I do want us to give it some time in a little bit about the projects that you also came up with. But Millie, what was for you like the thing that stood out the most, other than the fact that men are not often involved in these conversations, but something that you would want people to really consider that stood out to you?
So about the term masculinity, I think it has, like the definition of it, I think it's fluid. It means something else to everybody else. It's not like a fixed definition. You can define it yourself. Women can have masculine traits as well can men and everyone in between. And I think we usually confuse it with gender roles. We feel like men have to be a certain way, women have to be a certain way, behave a certain way, have certain personality traits. Um, and like you said, the word masculinity has a stigma because if we think about masculinity, we think about the toxic form of masculinity, which is not expressing yourself, being abusive. And that's what I realized. Like, masculine is not something you can define for everybody. It's different for everybody, and that's how it should be. There's no there's no term for it to yeah, everyone can express it in their own way. And um, it just I learned a lot about um, as a woman. I learned a lot more about how men um, can be vulnerable in this, and how it makes them feel, and how the pressure is to behave a certain way, or otherwise you will be cancelled, like you said. And that also made me really, reflect on myself, and also be aware of, okay, maybe I need to use terms in a different way, or be more careful with my words, or how I expect men to behave. So that was the most like an eye opener for me, definitely, by doing the research.
And I think that's fair, but I can imagine that, and that's also where that adds to the power, right, that women have in that process, where you realize that we also go out with expectations, and we set expectations onto people in general. And like you said, there is no cookie cutter way of, but just generally finding like certain traits that are indeed considered masculine. And even if the person who is there is not necessarily like a masculine person, right, what would be considered in the totality, that even if they have like those small masculine traits, that it's okay as long as they're good. And vice versa as well, right? But I also think that it can be hard for men in general if they feel like within a culture they have to uphold certain roles and certain behaviors, um, because there is backlash to it. And Ken, I'm looking at you. I can imagine that the moment you choose to move away, especially as a younger man, because there are ages where it's like crucial, right? It's who the mark that you're gonna make in your group, in your peers, in your family, in your society, and that kind of marks. It doesn't, even though you may change, even though you may grow into like this complete different person, it still like creates like this baseline for how people are going to perceive you in your adult life, right? Do you find it hard for yourself, or maybe for men in Aruba, especially in Aruba, or in the Caribbean even, to move away from maybe what is considered the cookie cutter version of Caribbean men, and then not getting backlash for it? Like, is it hard to be true to yourself, or do you think it's reasonable?
Um, I'd say now we live in a very changing time, you could say. Now it's more generally, you could say, more acceptable to not just embody, let's say, the stereotypical or the old masculine traits, but also be able to express yourself more, talk about certain topics more, or enter certain professions that originally might have been dominated by females. But yeah, you could say in the beginning it was not that easy, because you're going against the grain. You're going against what society is like expecting out of you, and it can be challenging at times, especially when you're, for instance, if you're the one doing this without those role models around you, without those people around you who have paved the way for you to move forward on. It could be difficult at times, where you do think to yourself like, okay, maybe it is easier to just go with the flow, go with whatever everyone does. But then, of course, using the knowledge I have now, if I did that, I would just be contributing to what is the toxicity behind it. I would be contributing to the stereotyping continuing. So for me, yeah, in the beginning it was a somewhat difficult step, but as I grew, as I learned through the studies, through talking with different people, professionals, people on the streets, friends, family, it became easier. It became more accepted, I guess. And it became a way where I could be like, okay, I can be myself without having to feel like if I show this or if I do that, I will be judged for it. So I think for most, or maybe quite a few men out there who have felt like they had to conform to that mold, if anything, now is the time to, truly explore yourself, explore who you are, explore what is initially you and what is conditioning.
Those core values, right? What is truly important to you as a person, and develop on those. And what are just things that you adopted? And by all means, I don't want anyone to feel bad if they find themselves finding a lot of things that they have been conditioned to do or behaviors that they have adopted, because that is just how the human brain works. And it's practice. It's with everything. Our brain also takes practice. We learn something through practice, and then we have to unlearn it through practice. And sadly, unlearning takes a little bit more effort.
Oh, yes.
But hopefully, the added value afterwards, that just being at peace with yourself is a good payoff. I mean, and I hope that you understand that, and I hope that you can find that for yourself, because I think that. I think it's very peaceful and soothing to living true to yourself, especially as an adult. I think when you're younger, it's a little bit harder. When you're a teenager, that's the need to be part of something is a little bit higher. But as you grow older, that need slowly kind of fades. And it turns out that if you are not happy with the person that you are, and you no longer are part of like this huge group or reliable on other people, you might not even like the person that you are. So it's okay if you're in that place, but then use that time, and you found time and space to figure out who you are. And by all means, you can be masculine and have some traits that are maybe not even considered masculine within like Caribbean standards, and that's okay. It is important that you're at peace with yourself and your actions, your behaviors, and eventually the persons that you choose to share your life with, be it family, be it partners, colleagues, everything else, right? All right, so we have a couple more minutes, and I just want to say thank you also for Keanu for being vulnerable on air, right? Because I can imagine that it's not necessarily easy. Sometimes when I reach out and ask people to come onto my program, especially, in this case, you did the research, so you know the information. So I ask you from that perspective, and I kind of sometimes forget that it also has some vulnerable level to it. So I do want to acknowledge that now, and thank you for it. And yeah, because it I shouldn't assume that you would be, or that sharing your information would come with that. So I want to take the time to say that. All right, so in your process, you kind of found different ways that you think could have a positive impact onto adults, young adults, but also adolescents, to reaching out to them and creating safe spaces. Tell us a little bit about that, and then also tell us about the project that is already ongoing.
Yep.
And how people can participate or be part of that.
Now, I'm guessing through our extensive research, we found different means of doing so. Of course, not all of them are applicable for Aruba, because, again, we do have limited resources. We don't get a budget from school to actually, conduct some of these projects, because there are so many wonderful ideas out there. but we also have to remember the limitations that we have, the time constraints, the budgeting. So that's why we did come with one simple idea we thought was to, for instance, create a support group, let's say, on Facebook. So it's a closed group. Right now it consists of 52 members, I think, give or take. And we just hope that we can continue making this grow. It's a private group, and whatever is said in there is to be able to enhance the quality of life for everyone, not just men, but for everyone. Because the information we share on there is so we can all learn together, learn what it means to be men within society, and learn what it means to be able to contribute, to be able to support, be able to love and be loved. Because that is one important aspect that many men are scared to, allow. So we offer this space to, one, be able to share your opinions, be able to share your thoughts, your fears, your dreams, your aspirations. It is a space where we can all be safe, learn together, support one another, and just grow.
Melly, do you maybe want to add a little bit to this as well?
Um, okay, I know covered most of the of the parts, but yes, this group it's a safe space. You can share anything in there, videos from important speakers, or just or if you want to express yourself, have questions. There are also professionals in the group that have more knowledge on this topic that can give you an answer. You can also send private messages. Even if you don't want to share your name, you can also post it anonymously. So yeah, everyone is welcome to share and ask questions in this group.
All right, and what is this group called? Because I mean, you haven't shared the name yet, so people don't know
Yeah.
what to search for.
So it's called Positive Masculinity Support Group.
Okay, and that's
Yes.
on Facebook.
Yes.
I joined the group as well, and I think it's a good idea, and I'm part of another support group as well. And indeed, the aspect of just information sharing is really good, because people are, even if though it's a closed group, people might be a little bit shy, but just having a space where there's some information being thrown in there that you can always go back and look at, even when maybe you don't need it at that point. It's a good thing. And you had other ideas for possible projects. So what are things that you said obviously the university doesn't necessarily have a budget for these things, but what are things that you would like to see a little bit more happening within our community in regards to like possible projects that maybe somebody is listening, or somebody thinks that they are able to work on that?
As for our projects, well, one of them is difficult to accomplish.
Yeah.
But outside of that one, possibilities that I did wanted to continue with myself personally, especially in the topic of advocating for the awareness of healthy masculinity, or is try to organize especially talks like this, or keep advocating for the word either on media, the social media sites, even perhaps giving like a motivational talk about the topic. So public speaking, things, different topics. And these are ideas that I wanted to make it reality within the coming years. To just, even if I reach one or two people, that is one or two people more that are aware, that can help contribute to a healthier society.
Yes, indeed. And by all means, if you are listening and you feel an affinity for these topics, you think that you want to have further conversations on these topics, please, I encourage you, reach out to the Facebook group, the support group, maybe reach out to one of the students who worked on these projects. But if you want to reach out to me as well, if there are ways that we can contribute to indeed sharing good stuff, right? The good stuff that is going to make us grow, that is going to make us become better people in general, then I am all for it.
Yeah.
And yes, so Millie and Keanu, I just want to thank you for coming here today. And we are slowly moving away from Carnival this last weekend, but we are slowly moving into March. March is a charged month in regards to gender topics, especially as we go into Women's Day. We will see a lot of information going out there. I encourage you to have an open heart, open mind as you get this information, but also be aware if you see something that you think is conflicting, that you think is worrisome in some way. Think about it, and then see if you can reach out to those people. Yes, and I encourage more men to be involved in those conversations as well. Be involved in those programs. Be involved in the decision making. Be involved in the process of creating a more gender equal world, to make sure that we are not creating a space that is not safe for a particular group. Millie, Keanu, is there anything else that you want us to think about or consider before we close up? If it's nothing, it's fine too.
Yeah, just stay aware and stay reflecting.
Yes.
That's the most important message.
Thank you.
Maybe for my final word, it's something I already mentioned before, but for maybe the men out there, it's okay to love and it's okay to be loved.
Thank you for that, Keanu. All right. Thank you so much. If you tuned in live on either 98.9 Cool FM on the radio or on Facebook or on YouTube, if you just got a part of it or the end of it, don't worry. The live will stay on Facebook, the live will stay on YouTube, but you can also get the episode to listen to on Apple Podcasts and Spotify by Monday. So I will probably upload it between today and tomorrow, but it will be available on Monday. Listen to it, share it with others if you think this episode was meaningful, if you think there was good information in it. I hope to see you again next week. Thank you to Cool FM 98.9, and of course, thank you to Neutrogena and Friskies for making this possible. All right, bye. See you next week. Oh wait, let's play my music.